All right, we're live. It's a Wednesday night here for the Panther-Lair Show. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com is the YouTube channel where we do this every Wednesday night. Get together for an hour and talk a little Pitt sports. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. See that website there, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. The most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com, and you know all of this by now, and you also know it's the best online community of Pitt sports fans. If you want to go and talk about Pitt sports with other Pitt fans, best place to do it is the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. We pump out a ton of content every day, articles, interviews, analysis, evaluate, all those things. We put out the content, you read about it, and then you go to the message boards and talk about it with other Pitt fans at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And then we do this. We get together here every Wednesday night for an hour or so, give or take a few minutes, and talk about whatever's going on in the world of Pitt sports. And as we move through mid-August, we come up to the end of August. We're now, we're doing this show on Wednesday night. It's 2 weeks from tomorrow. If you're listening to the podcast or watching the video later in the week, it's 2 weeks from either today, if you're watching this on Thursday, 2 weeks from yesterday, if you're watching this on Friday, 2 weeks from 2 days ago, if you're watching this on Saturday, and so on and so forth until that season opener. It's coming up fast. They're almost, coming to the end of week 3 of training camp. They'll have a handful of practices next week, and then it's game week. Monday, Pound-Narduzzi press conference on the 29th. And everything goes from there. We head into that season opener on Thursday night, September 1st against West Virginia. A lot of time between now and then, though. Even though time is going fast, we're more than halfway through training camp. Like I say, just 2 weeks away from the opener. 2 weeks in a day, I guess, tonight. There's still a lot of time and still a lot of things for this team to work on. Still a lot of things to prepare for and dive into. And certainly a lot of things for us to talk about. And so we get together here every Wednesday night to do just that. And I talk for a while. You post your comments and questions in the chat screen there. I get to those comments and questions. And if you want to make sure your comment gets read on the show, if you want to make sure your question gets answered, because we get a lot of comments and questions in the chat screen. We don't get to all of them every week. I readily admit that. We hit around 9:30 or so at night, and it's time to hang it up for the evening. If you want to make sure your comment gets read, if you want to make sure your question gets answered, you can be a super chatter. Click that little $ down at the bottom of the chat screen. Toss a couple bucks to the podcast. We appreciate that more than I can say. And we will definitely make sure we get to your comment and answer your question. And of course, the other thing you can really do to help us out, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We want to spread the word. We want to try and keep pumping out more content on YouTube. Got some plans for some new things maybe in the works coming up here. But the way you can help us is by liking the video, sharing the video, subscribing to the YouTube channel. Tell a friend, say, hey, you got to go check this out. Go watch this. That would mean a lot to me. Certainly would appreciate it, and it would help us keep doing what we're trying to do here on YouTube and adding to some of our Pitt video content. So with the season approaching, with, as I say, we're 15 days away from the start, from the season opener. Been doing some more radio lately. Different radio gigs on Monday, actually. It was I had like 3 different things that I did. I was on a Twitter space with David Hale and Andrea Adelson from ESPN. As they went through their Coastal Division preview, I obviously provided the Pitt content for that one. Later in the day, I was on with Roddy Jones and I forget his name, Kevin Hester? I forget, on ESPNU, on Sirius, and then did a show in Morgantown, State Sports Line with Tony Caridi, and I forget who else was on that show. Obviously with a little West Virginia interest in previewing the season opener with a look at Pitt. And so did a lot of stuff that day, got some more coming up the next few days. And I mentioned this not to tout my various media appearances because, look, I save all the best stuff for you guys. Wednesday nights are when I really bring the goods, bring the takes. But I bring it up because it kind of occurred to me that when I got through the day on Monday, and I'd finished doing up these 3 different interviews. They were all 3 are like 10, 15 minutes each, and we run through the normal topics. What's Keaton Slovis look like? How's this defense going to be? And ultimately it comes around to a question about what are the expectations for this team. And I realized I would work myself up into such a lather that by the time I got done with these interviews, when people were asking me the expectations, I tweeted out this joke that, on the Twitter Spaces with David Hale and Andre Adelson from ESPN, they asked each reporter to give a prediction, and I was right. The Duke guy, Stephen Weisman, led it off. David Teal, who does Virginia Tech and Virginia, was right after me, and I was right in the middle. I was the second slot, and the Duke guy, Stephen Weisman, was like, if they win 4 games, it'll be a good season. And David Teal, who did the Virginia Tech segment right after me, said if they can get bowl eligible, it'll be a good season. And here I am in the middle of it all, talking about how if they don't go 10-2, it's a disappointment. And look, Pitt should have a better season than Duke. I don't think there's any question about it. Pitt should have a better season than Virginia Tech. But I said those words, and I thought about it after the fact, and I tweeted out that joke that, like, yeah, Duke guy says they should win 4, Virginia Tech guy says they hope to be bowl eligible, I say they should be 10 wins. And as I thought about it, and I went on these other interviews and kind of repeated the same thing, that it would be a disappointment if they do worse than 10-2. And it would be a disappointment if those 2 losses are to teams, anybody other than Tennessee and Miami. And that's not to say that other teams can't compete with Pitt. That's not to say that Pitt is that much better than all of these other teams that they're going to play, the other 10 teams on their schedule. But I think they should expect to win those other 10 games. With the most challenging maybe being at Virginia or at North Carolina. They should expect to win those games. They should expect to beat Tennessee, expect to beat Miami, all that kind of thing. But really, those are the 2 most challenging games on the schedule. And if there are losses to any of the other 10 teams, I think it's a disappointment, including West Virginia, including North Carolina, including Virginia Tech. And I realized as I continue to repeat this line that it would be a disappointment to do worse than 10-2. I realized that, look, with everything I've seen through training camp, with what I saw through spring camp, with what I've heard from talking to different players, talking to different coaches on and off the record, that this really is where this team should be. That when you look at what they have coming back, look at how they filled in the holes that they have, that these really should be the expectations. The expectation really should be to win 10 games in the regular season. And I was kind of, I don't know, it caught up to me at the end of the night on Monday night when I was like, what am I saying? What are we doing here? Why are we setting this bar so high? I can list all the personnel and the returning production and all those things. I know why we're setting this bar so high, but don't I know better than to set the expectations as high as I've been setting them? And I thought back to like 2010. They're coming off the 10-3 season in 2009, where they obviously had the disappointing loss to Cincinnati, but they finish it up with a bowl win over North Carolina. They've got, they lose Billy Stahl. They lose, Doran Dickerson. They lose some of the offensive linemen. They lose, Mick Williams. I think Gus Moustakis was gone after that, too, after 2009. But they bring back Dion Lewis. They bring back Jonathan Baldwin. They bring back Greg Romius and Jabal Sheard. And they're bringing in Tino Sinceri, who there were high expectations for at that point. It was a thought that he would be good enough, that they would be fine, that their defense would pick up where they left off. And Tino would be able to kind of carry, Tino wouldn't need to carry the load because he had Dion Lewis to rely on. And so there were high expectations. That was the last time Pitt was ranked in the preseason. It was 2010. And there was really a thought that this team could make some noise. I still remember, it's clear as day, E.J. Borghetti, the media relations director, the sports information director, going on 93.7 The Fan and legitimately entertaining questions of a Heisman candidacy for Dion Lewis. And talking about how the team had to achieve at a certain level in order to accomplish it. The expectations really were that high. Now, that season rather famously crashed and burned. You know, they opened the season with a loss at Utah. They opened the season, after that, they get blown out at home by Miami. They get blown out at home by West Virginia. They have a bad loss at Notre Dame, a loss where they blew the game at Notre Dame. They blow their opportunity at winning the Big East in a game at Connecticut. I mean, it was just disaster after disaster, not to mention all the off-season things. From Jabal Sheard over the summer through, I mean, do you remember that run leading up to the Miami game? Dan Mason and Jason Douglas and did Fernando Diaz get in trouble at that point? I think Keith Coleman, the walk-on of it. I mean, the guys were getting arrested all over. It was a mess. It was a disaster. The season fell apart. And so I looked back at that and I said, well, what happened there? What happened? And more relevantly, can that happen again this year? And I don't think it can. Well, I shouldn't say it can't. Anything can happen. But that team, I think, had some serious deficiencies. They had some injury problems. And they also, I mean, there was some bad coaching. There were really bad coaching decisions in the Notre Dame game. There were bad coaching decisions in the UConn game. And there was a real lack of discipline, particularly in the West Virginia game. And so I don't feel like that season is a precedent for this coming season, despite maybe being the last time expectations were as high as they are right now, at least in terms of being ranked in the preseason. But as I went down that line of thought, and as I talked myself off the ledge of thinking this was another 2010 coming up, I did sort of go down another path of asking myself, okay, not necessarily what are we missing here, but when we look at this team, where could things go wrong? If this team is going to fall short of expectations, if this team is going to go 8-4 or 7-5 or something like that, which would be a tremendous disappointment, what are the potential shortcomings of this team that could lead to a result like that? Like, what are we not talking about enough in terms of potential negatives? And this, I know this is not going to be a negatives show. I mean, this is just one topic kind of off the top of my head to start things, just something I've been thinking about for the last couple of days. And we're going to get into a lot of other things from training camp as well. There's a lot of positives to talk about. There continues to be a ton of positives with this team. The depth on both lines, the emergence of a couple key outside linebackers, the impressive groups in the secondary and at wide receiver, the running backs are studs. There are a lot of good things to talk about. But where could this team come up short? What could be the things that sink this team's aspirations? And I think there's a few. And the first one, the most obvious one, the biggest question mark for the team, and the thing that will either propel them to 10 wins or more or hold them back to 8 wins. You know what I mean? When it's, are you going back to Charlotte or back to 8 wins? That question will be answered by the play at quarterback. Because I have a lot of confidence in Kedon Slovis. I think the Pitt coaches have a lot of confidence in Kedon Slovis. I think the Pitt players have a lot of confidence in Kedon Slovis. I think you probably have a lot of confidence in Kedon Slovis. And I think rightfully so. This isn't Tino Sinceri 2010. This isn't Billy Stahl 2008 that we're basing all of these hopes on a guy who has no proven experience. This is a guy who's thrown almost 60 touchdowns at the Power 5 level. This is a guy who was an all-conference performer. This was a guy who was an all-conference offensive freshman of the year. This is a guy who has played a lot and succeeded and played well and played effectively at a high level. And so there's reason to be optimistic, but it's not a sure thing because we haven't seen him do it here. And quite frankly, he had struggles in 2021. Injuries, yes, but he was off. Is he going to be back on? Everything I hear says yes. Different people I talk to at practice who've watched more practice than I have. People who, coaches, players, people who are seeing this stuff on a daily basis say, yeah, this kid can make all the throws. He's got a big time arm. Somebody just told me today he's an NFL. He's got NFL talent. He's got NFL arm talent. That's great. How does he do it in a game? And that's not a question we're going to be able to answer until he does it in a game. That's number one. That's the biggest unknown, and that's the biggest thing that could sink this team. Like I say, that question of going back to Charlotte or back to 8 wins, Kedon Slovis holds the answer to that question. Simple as that. Now, even if he is only average or maybe even below average, this team should still win 8 games. I think the baseline talent of this team is good enough to get 8 wins. But if he is above average, if he is good, if he is better than good, if he is great, then this team's ceiling is sky high. That's the number one thing. And I'm not even going to, when we talk about things that could sink this season, things that, what could go wrong, I'm not even, like, injuries aren't obvious. I mean, obviously, if you have injuries at key positions, you're going to be in big trouble. Everybody suffers from that. One of the big talking points out of State College this week as they talk about Penn State being unranked is, Sean Clifford doesn't get hurt. They would have been 6-0. They would have been a top 5 team. Who knows how good they would. Well, okay. Those things happen. I can assure you, all the people telling you this week about how Penn State would have been this and that if Sean Clifford didn't get hurt will not be making the same excuses for Pitt if Keaton Slovis were to suffer a similar fate. File that one away. Bring it up later if unfortunate circumstances befall your Pitt Panthers. But I digress. Injuries always carry the risk of sinking your season. You know what I mean? Of cutting you short by 1 or 2 wins. So we're not going to count that because that's just sort of an omnipresent concern. I'm talking more about concerns with the current team. We've spent so much time all offseason and certainly over the last 2 weeks talking about those things that are really good, those things that are really encouraging, those things that are going to push this team over the top. What about the other side of it? And the quarterback is a question mark. He's a question mark until he goes out and does it. An even bigger question mark, and it might have less impact on the games, but it'll still be a significant factor, and it's something I think they need to get figured out, and I'm not sure they have an answer, special teams. And I wrote about this on Sunday. I might have even talked about it in the weekend recap on Monday. It's they don't have Kirk Christodoulou back there. They don't have a 5th-year senior. They don't have a guy who's played a bunch and has a lot of experience. They have a brand new guy in Sam Vanderhaar. And I think there are things that Vanderhaar can do, maybe even things he can do that Kirk Christodoulou couldn't do. But I don't know as it stands right now. And maybe we'll see him get into games and he'll just boom the ball and it won't be a concern at all. But right now, I don't think he provides a significant advantage in terms of field position. I don't think the way I've seen him punt in camp, the way I've heard from other people about how he has punted in camp, it has not been an advantage for Pitt of putting the defense in really favorable position. That needs to improve. You cannot lose a game or put a game in jeopardy due to special teams. You just can't. There are too many factors out there. There are too many things that are in or out of your control. There are too many things you have to account for. You cannot have bad punting or shoddy field goal kicking cost you a game. It is incredibly difficult to win 12 games in a row. You know what I mean? In the regular season. And beyond that, 13, 14, however many it gets to. It's incredibly difficult to do that. I think you don't see teams go undefeated very often because I think it's really hard to go week after week and either be perfect or close enough to perfect that you're able to continue winning. That you're closer to perfect than your opponent is. I think it's really tough to do that. You cannot lose one of those efforts. You can't have the deciding factor. You can't have special teams serve as a deciding factor that goes against you. And I think that's a legitimate concern, and I don't know if it's going to improve by the time the season starts. I don't know how much it's going to improve by the time the season starts. Now, this could all be nothing. We could get into the season, and Vanderhaar could boot it and be awesome, and Sam Scarton could be awesome, nail every field goal, and every operation would be perfect, and all this stuff. But you got a lot of new moving parts in there. You got a new long snapper, you got a new holder, you got a new punter. I mean, out of you have 4 main special teams, sort of uniquely special teams kicking positions, right? Long snapper, holder, kicker, punter. And you could throw in, Ben Sauls as the kickoff guy, which, you could count that as well. But, when you're talking about sort of the moving parts that are really going to have a significant impact of long snapper, holder, field goal kicker, punter. 3 of those 4 guys are new. And the other one, the fourth one, the one who's returned from last year, I think was a little shaky last season. Ended up with decent numbers, but also wasn't tested all that much. That's a concern. Those guys need to show that they can do it. And you would hate to see this team blow a game because of play or shoddy play or mistakes or miscues in the special teams units. That's a concern for me. Quarterback, special teams. I think this defense, love the defensive line. You guys know what I think about the outside linebackers, particularly Bengali Kamara. If you've been reading my stuff on Panther-Lair.com, you listened to the weekend recap that we released on Monday. I mean, I can't say enough good things about Bengali Kamara and his emergence as a stud playmaker for this defense. And, of course, the secondary has all those guys back. I think it's a really solid unit. There's a certain reality, though, that we've all come to expect and understand, and I shouldn't say expect or understand. There's a certain reality we've all come to accept, and it's that this defense is going to get beat sometimes. They're going to give up big plays. It's just going to happen. And sometimes it might be due to just sloppy play, like the first quarter of the Miami game. You go back and look at all the missed tackles in the first quarter of the Miami game. For all the things we talk about blown safety call or this or that or Kenny Pickett's interceptions, I mean, just make a couple tackles in the first quarter and that game doesn't go the way it did. It's kind of like after the blown safety call, you still got like 2nd and 11. You don't have to give up a big gain on that next play. Sloppy play. That's always going to be an issue, and there are going to be times where the structure of this defense is just not, it does not adjust, and it can be beaten. Weaknesses and vulnerabilities can be exposed. Most of the time, the defensive line is going to create pressure, and the secondary is going to hold down on coverage. You're going to get blitzes and things like that to really throw the quarterback off. But this defense is still going to get beat. They're going to have games that feel like it's feast or famine, whether you either get a sack or give up a long touchdown pass. So that's always sort of lurking out there. Now, last year, they were able to account for that and overcome it because their offense was so potent. That's a question mark that exists. Can the offense be potent enough? Unique thing about this season, of course, is you're working with an offensive coordinator who's been here before. We've seen up close and personal what Frank Cignetti can do. And so I think some people might be more concerned about the offense than I am. My concern is almost exclusively around the quarterback position and how Keaton Slovis does taking over in that spot. I think Frank Cignetti can call an offense. I think they've got obviously the offensive line to do it. I think the running backs are great. I've talked about that. I've talked about Izzy Abanikanda and Rodney Hammond. I think those guys, I wrote in the 3-2-1 column last week, the one prediction was that Abanikanda will lead the ACC in rushing this year, and Rodney Hammond will lead the ACC in rushing next year, provided both stay healthy and you don't run into any injuries there. And then the receiving core, I'm getting really bullish on those guys. I think Konate Mumfield is really, really good. I think Bub Means is going to be a threat. I think Jared Wayne is great at being Jared Wayne. I think Jalen Barton can have a breakout season. This is a good receiving core. Really good. Are they better than last year? I don't know. It's tough to compare because last year had that one spectacular superstar. This year might just have a couple stars, borderline superstars, but have a couple more of them than it had last year. I think they're going to be good at receiver. It's just going to be getting that guy who can get the ball to them. There are ways this season could go wrong. There are things that might not develop the way they need to develop. But even as I sort of search my brain to find those ways that things could fall apart, I still end up grasping a little bit. But maybe something will emerge in the next week and a half or so. Let's see what's going on with people here in the chat screen. See what people are talking about. Super chatter. Who is it? Byron Fleck. He's a super chatter. Byron, you got a comment in here somewhere? You got to put your comment with your super chat so we can be sure to get to it. Oh, I see you. Here you are, Byron. Hypothetically, what happens if Pitt loses to West Virginia and Tennessee at home, opening at 0-2? Message boards calling for Narduzzi's head. No? Justified? I mean, if Pitt opens the season at 0-2, listen, let me put it to you this way, all right? People ask me sometimes, a lot of times, people ask me, are you a Pitt fan? You went to Pitt. Are you a Pitt fan? You've been covering this for a long time, following along. Are you a Pitt fan? You cheer for the team. You root for the team, right? And what I always say is like, I went to Pitt. I did. I graduated in 2001 or 2002, depending on when the paperwork actually got processed. And what I always say is I started this job in 2005. So, 17 years of covering this team. Covering recruiting, covering the team, going to all the games, and all that kind of stuff. And what I say, no, I don't root for the team to win. And my interest in the outcomes of the games does not influence how I cover the team or what I write about the team or what I any of that kind of stuff. What I always say is that my sort of motivating factor is business related. Like, what's good for business? That's what I want to have happen. And not just what can sell more subscriptions, but what's going to make my life easiest on the message boards. It's reality. Like, I'm sitting there at the Western Michigan game last year. I'm sitting in the Heinz Field press box, or I'm walking out of Heinz Field, and am I frustrated and disgruntled and discouraged? Yeah. Is it because Pitt lost? Sort of, but only because of the impact it'll have on the message boards. And I know what my next week is going to be like, and probably more, because who are they playing the next week? Like New Hampshire or somebody like that. So I knew there wasn't going to be anybody taking any solace in, Pitt beating the crap out of New Hampshire. And so that's what I walked out thinking, oh God, the boards are going to be a real disaster after this one. And the next week is going to be a real mess. And it's the same thing with the basketball. After the Georgia Tech game last year on the basketball side, when they blew, they had the 3-game winning streak and they come home and, people were actually starting to get a little interested and a little excited and they blow it sort of spectacularly. I'm walking out of the Pete saying, the boards are going to be a real disaster with this. And so that kind of motivates me. I like an easy week on the boards. I like a good stretch on the message boards where people are generally positive and it's not all arguing and bickering and negative and thread after thread of who's going to be our next. Because after the Western Michigan game last year, it was thread after thread of who's going to be the next head coach. Who do we want? Do we want this guy? Do we want that guy? Can we get this guy? Can we get that guy? It was 3 freaking games into the season. And people are talking about which coach they want to hire next. And if Pitt opens this season 0-2, it's going to be again. It's going to be after the first game. It'll be after the first quarter. If West Virginia is up like 14-0 at the end of the first quarter, there will be talk about which coach Pitt should hire next. At the end of the first quarter against Wake Forest in the ACC championship game, after a 10-2 regular season, first 10-win regular season in 40 years, at the end of the first quarter, there were posts about, Narduzzi just can't get it done. And the only reason he got to this point is because of Kenny Pickett. And he's never going to be a good coach. Pitt's never going to be good under him. And they really need to, could you fire a coach after a 10-win season and division championship? There were posts on the board about that. Now, that obviously changed over the course of that game. But this is the natural reaction. And I don't begrudge fans the right to complain. Certainly, we're all watching the Pirates right now. And we've got plenty of reasons to complain. And I don't begrudge Pitt fans who get frustrated with the program from time to time. It's just that my job, one very particular, very important aspect of my job, facet of my job, is sort of existing with the fans. You know what I mean? On the message board community, because we're all there all day, every day, talking about Pitt sports. And I'm diving into those conversations and having, those interactions and those discussions with people. And look, it's a lot more fun after the Clemson game or after the Wake Forest game after the game than it is after the Western Michigan game or the Miami game. So, are people going to be calling for Pat Narduzzi's head if Pitt opens 0-2? Yeah. Are they going to be doing it if Pitt opens 0-1? Yeah, they are. even if they, well, if they open 0-1 and come back and beat Tennessee in week 2, it'll calm down because people will feel a little bit better. But if they go 0-2, people will start talking about how they're likely to probably not win more than 3 games all season, because that was the case after the Western Michigan game. You know what I mean? They were 2-1 at that point, and I mean, there were posts talking about how there isn't more than 2 wins left on this schedule: New Hampshire and Georgia Tech, and they might not even beat Georgia Tech. I mean, these are the reactions you get. So yeah, Byron, if they open 0-2, if they lose to West Virginia and Tennessee, yeah, all hell is going to break loose on the boards. No doubt about that. All right, TRR starts us off on the chat, says, what can go wrong? Because I named this show tonight, What Can Go Wrong? Because that's sort of the topic here. He says, what can go wrong? I see a lot of interceptions in the videos that Pitt posts on Twitter. Is this concerning or normal? Or if the wide receiver hype falls flat and these dudes can't catch? So they do put interceptions on the highlight videos that they like to put out. They put a lot of catches, too. I think the interceptions they like to put on there because they're exciting, flashy plays, and everybody is excited to see that, you know? And so, what do those highlight videos have? Like, 6 plays, 8 plays, so they might put 2 picks on there. I mean, there are probably interceptions thrown every day in training camp practice. Now, a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times they try not to show you who threw those interceptions. They try not to show you who is the intended target on those interceptions, and sometimes they still do. I think if they had their way, they would just have sort of an isolated camera on, MJ Devonshire or Rashad Battle or whoever it may be making the pick. I'm not too concerned about what I see on the highlight reels that Pitt puts out. State media is very discerning in what it releases, although given all the kerfluffle over Brandon Hill not practicing last week and the fact that it got brought up to Pat Narduzzi, I mean, Pitt released a video that had Brandon Hill clearly standing in shorts in the background of a drill. So Pitt put out a video showing that Brandon Hill wasn't participating. And then Pat Narduzzi got frustrated when he was asked if Brandon Hill was participating. That's neither here nor there. They're mostly discerning in what they put out. They just try to put out a couple things that you know what I liken it to. All right, this is a reference that some people will get and some people won't get. If you watched Mad Men, when Mad Men was on, sort of currently when Mad Men was airing on AMC every Sunday night or Monday night, whatever night it was, at the end of each episode they'd have a next on the next Mad Men, and it was a joke. It became a great internet joke because it was just the most random scenes from the next week, and they were scenes from the next week's episode, but they gave no indication whatsoever to any storyline or any narrative or any continuation of a current storyline or any developments. It would be like, on the next Mad Men, and one character would be like, really? Another character would go. Another character would be like, I'm done. Another character would be like, did you see that? And it was just random shots. And I think it had to have been a joke by the show's creators to put the just most random, disconnected, uninformative clips into this 20-second or 30-second, on the next Mad Men, trailer preview, maybe 15 seconds or whatever it was. And that's what I always think of when I see Pitt put out the scrimmage highlights, right? So they had a scrimmage on Saturday and they put out scrimmage highlights. And they put out the most random, disjointed, disconnected clips that don't really tell anything at all. And if you watch those clips trying to glean information about the team, you're grasping and you're going to draw conclusions that may or may not be based in reality. If they show a walk-on safety making an interception, that doesn't mean that guy is starting against West Virginia. And I'm not saying that people would assume that they are, but I guess what I'm saying is I would caution against putting too much stock into what they show you in those videos that they release, either out of practice each day or out of the scrimmages, because it's a whole lot of nothing. RJC Man 38 is a super chatter. I don't know if you got a comment in there, RJC Man. You usually have something to say. You're probably angry about Heather Lake for something, but I don't see it yet. So I'll keep an eye out and check, see what you have to say. Royce Beacom says, if Pat Narduzzi won't identify the quarterbacks that threw interceptions in the scrimmage, I guess we won't be provided with throws and completions for each quarterback. No, they used to give out stats for the quarterbacks, or after the scrimmage. There was a brief period where Pitt would release stats from the scrimmage. The scrimmages that were closed to the media, they would then release stats. But there was something that happened one time where they like screwed him up and put like 2 interceptions on one quarterback, but they were supposed to be on another quarterback, or one guy got the made this play and they gave it to another guy, and at that point it just became, we can't rely on these things, and I think they stopped supplying it after that. They just don't want you to know. They don't want you to know what's happening in camp. You get to know what happens on 11 Saturdays and 1 Thursday night, and that's all you really need to know as far as Pat Narduzzi is concerned. Vincent Calvo says, how aggressive do you think Pitt will be against West Virginia to start the game? Normally have a warm-up game with a vanilla scheme, then unleash most of the offense in game 2. Yeah, I mean, Vincent, that is normally what they do, but they're not holding anything back in this game. Obviously Tennessee's a big opponent in week 2. West Virginia's a big opponent in week 1. They've opened against a Power 5, a prominent opponent once before, Virginia, in 2019. They opened against Virginia, and I don't think they held anything back that day, even though that was a brand new offense they were bringing in. I mean, now granted, that was an ACC game, but they're not holding anything back against West Virginia. They're going out and trying to win. The only thing that might limit their aggressiveness is just sort of first game, either jitters or rust or anything like that. That might hold them back, but they're not going to willfully hide some of the playbook the way that they have, against, Villanova is a great example in 2000. What year was that? 2016, when they held quite a bit of the offense back, before really unleashing it against Penn State. But they've done that sort of every year. It's almost cost them, I think, a few times. Youngstown State, they went to overtime. Pat Narduzzi's first year, they had like a 1-score game against Youngstown State. Obviously, I think there have been a few years in there where it's almost cost them. But, when you're playing West Virginia in the opener, you're not going to hold anything back. Ari Meyer says, I'm moving in as a freshman tomorrow, and I think people haven't talked enough about what JT Daniels might do. Yeah, I don't sense a lot of concern with JT Daniels. I guess he hasn't officially been named the starter yet, right? I mean, this guy's played, I just brought up his stats just to check. He's played 10 games over the last 3 years. He's attempted, I don't know, what's the number here? Do the math. 153, 250 passes or so over the last 3 seasons. He's thrown 18 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. I mean, that's not a bad touchdown to interception ratio, but he's a guy who's never caught on. He lost out to Keaton Slovis. He's a guy who's never caught on. He's a guy who's never really made the impact he was expected to make, and now he's on his 3rd school. I mean, I honestly, even though West Virginia is returning a ton of experience on the offensive line, I think Pitt's defensive line wins that battle. I think Pitt's defensive line wins the line of scrimmage, and I think JT Daniels, whatever natural talent he might have, I think it's going to be hard for him to show it, because I think Pitt's defensive line is going to get after him consistently throughout the game on September 1st. Ryan Kaminsky says, I've tried to think of different ways this Pitt team might not be really, really good, and I'm having trouble coming up with anything. Maybe if Slovis isn't back to being himself, that's about it. I mean, I do think that's the deciding factor, because when you look at Pitt 2020 versus 2021, aside from COVID and things like that, and just how screwed up all of 2020 was. Heck, if you look at the difference between 2019 and 2021, the biggest difference was the play at quarterback. It was not the only difference, but the biggest difference was how much better Kenny Pickett was in 2021 than how he was in 2020 and 2019. I mean, that was the single biggest difference. Quarterback is the make or break position. And, I think the stakes are only elevated when you have a roster like Pitt's. A roster that brings back as much as they're bringing back, all the offensive linemen, 8 out of 11 starters on defense with some guys really emerging for those 3 open spots, a great running back room, and what looks like a really good receiving room. The X factor, the thing that could really make or break the season, is the quarterback. And that's what's going to be the difference, and we won't know until we know. We'll find out when we find out. Brock Madonic says a lot of smoke on Twitter with Pitt and Hakeem Williams yesterday. Yeah, Hakeem Williams, 5-star wide receiver, number 16 prospect in the country. Continues to be a top target for Pitt. Continues to seem to hold Pitt in pretty high regard. His mother certainly tweets a lot of nice things about Pitt. And, Pitt continues to be, I think, a major factor for Hakeem Williams. And, we've talked about this before. The commitment date is set for September 23rd, but he's still intending to take more official visits after that. I think he's talked about visiting Texas A&M and Florida State after he commits. So does that mean he's committing to one of those schools? Or does that mean he's committing to another school and still visiting those schools on official visits? I'm inclined to think it might be that last one, that he's going to commit to a different school and then visit those two. Either way, it's going to be a battle. It's going to go all the way down to signing day in December. If Pitt is fortunate enough to secure his commitment in late September, they're going to have to battle for 3 months to hold on to him until signing day. But I think they're very much in the mix. And again, I think they're more in the mix than most of the national writers are giving them credit for. Pitt is one of 2 schools that have hosted Hakeem Williams for an official visit. He only took 2 official visits in June, and one of those was to Pitt. The other one was to Georgia. He's also planning to come back to Pitt for an unofficial visit on September 10th, the day of the Tennessee game. I don't know how you can count. And he took an unofficial visit to Pitt in the spring. So that will be 3 visits over the course of 6 months. Once every 2 months, Hakeem Williams will be on Pitt's campus. And really, I forget, he might have been here in April, which would make it only 5 months. Either way, 3 visits over the course of 6 months seems to indicate some legitimate interest. Seems to indicate that Pitt is a legitimate contender for Hakeem Williams. Now, he has said that he wants to see how teams do to start the season. So, yeah, it would be in Pitt's best interest to go out and beat West Virginia and beat Tennessee. But they're very much in the hunt there. It's just going to be a battle from now until signing day in December. Let's see here. Ryan Kaminsky says, hot take, I think the game at Louisville is the second toughest game on the schedule after Miami. We'll see. I've heard differing opinions on Malik Cunningham, the Louisville quarterback. I thought pretty highly of him. I thought he was sort of with all the quarterbacks in the ACC last year, with obviously Kenny Pickett and then Sam Hartman and Sam Howell and Brennan Armstrong and Tyler Van Dyke, all these quarterbacks in the ACC, and I felt like Cunningham was sort of the lurking in the shadows guy, the guy that nobody talked about, the underrated guy, who was kind of quietly one of the best. But I've talked to some people who aren't really all that impressed with him, and some people who feel like Pitt's defense usually does pretty well against quarterbacks like Cunningham, quarterbacks who rely on running as well as passing. I think they've done well against him. I think it's going to be a challenge. You're going on the road against a conference opponent. That's not going to be easy. And he is a good quarterback. He's a dynamic playmaker, but I think they can handle him. I'm still more concerned about Tennessee because I think Hendon Hooker can throw a little bit, maybe a little bit better than Malik Cunningham can. Brock McDonagh says, can you reconfirm that Dior Johnson, Federico, and Cassius McNeely will be with Pitt by the end of the month? Well, yeah, Brock, as you saw on the message boards, I said those three guys, those three incoming Pitt players, Pitt basketball players, are not with the team yet. They have not made it to Pitt yet. Dior Johnson had some academic things he had to wrap up. I think that was known and kind of understood. Federico and Cassius McNeely coming in from the junior college ranks. Look, it always gets dicey with JUCO players. It always gets a little bit tricky with JUCO players coming to Pitt. I think there's a reason you don't see the basketball or football teams go to the JUCO well all that often. And I think part of it is the requirements and the standards to get in. I think you run into trouble there. Now, that's not to say those guys can't get in, but I do think it gets a little bit tricky, with what transfers and credits and classes and things like that. Now, all three are expected to be here, by the time it's move-in day and by the time the team is getting ready to start practicing and workouts and all those things that they start doing once the semester starts. I think they're expected to be here for the start of the semester, but they're not here yet. So, yeah, the expectation is they'll be fine. Everything will be all right, but we'll watch and see. Benjamin Glazer says likelihood of a QB change at Clemson by Game 3. I have no idea. I'll tell you what, Ben, or Benjamin. I apologize if I call you Ben when you go prefer Benjamin, but I'll worry about Clemson when it's time to go to Charlotte. But I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen there. If DJ's not better than he was, it'll be interesting to see if they make a change and how soon they make a change, and then the impact that change has. Let's see. Josh Newark says, Ryan, referring to Ryan Kaminsky, who said the Louisville is the second toughest game on the schedule after Miami. Josh Newark says, Ryan, keep in mind that Louisville was 6-5 last year, and is their quarterback that good of a passer? Yeah, Louisville went 6-7, actually. They lost their bowl game to Air Force, so a 6-6 regular season. A 31-28 loss to Air Force at what bowl game was this? First Responder Bowl in University Park, Texas. Gerald Ford Stadium. Good Lord. But they had a lot of close games. I mean, just kind of going through what, Louisville's schedule. I mean, they lost at Wake Forest by 3 points. They lost to Virginia at home by 1. They lost to NC State by 2 scores, but they lost to Clemson by 6 points. They also got blown out by Kentucky, 52-21. That's not good. You don't want to do that against Kentucky. Even a 10-win Kentucky team, you don't want to lose by 30 to those guys. So I don't know what to make of Louisville. I think Malik Cunningham's dangerous, but I think Pitt might be able to get after him. Christian Kosmak says quarterback and secondary are the two areas that could hold us back from another level. Injuries always have the potential to ruin a season. Injuries definitely do. Quarterback and secondary. I mean, quarterback I talked about. Secondary doesn't concern me all that much. They lose Damari Mathis at corner, but like I said, A.J. Woods and M.J. Devonshire played a ton last year. You're not bringing in inexperienced guys, and you're not bringing in guys who don't have the athleticism and speed to play at this level. I mean, those are probably the two of the fastest guys on the team. A.J. Woods proudly proclaims himself as the fastest guy on the team. And MJ Devonshire, I mean, we saw him have a lot of success running track at Aliquippa when he was in high school. So you're not, you're not putting guys who have never played in there, and you're not putting guys who I think are of subpar athletic ability. AJ Woods had a huge interception in the ACC championship game. Kind of obviously Eric Hallett was the MVP of the game. A.J. Woods had maybe the game-changing play, maybe the one that really sealed it for Pitt with his interception. So I'm comfortable with the corners with Marquez Williams, A.J. Woods, and M.J. Devonshire. And the safeties, I mean, Eric Hallett and Brandon Hill, I think, are really solid. Maybe the most solid pair of safeties, maybe the best overall duo at safety that Pitt has had under Pat Narduzzi. And I know you might want to point to DeMar Hamlin and Paris Ford in 2019, and I love those guys. I love how they play. and love how they played that season. But Paris Ford, for all the dynamic, exciting plays, was unreliable and did not play within the scheme enough to that the coaches could count on him. And he gave up plays. For all the exciting splash plays that he made, and they were great. He was one of the most exciting players I've seen in my time covering Pitt. He also had errors and gaffes and mistakes that you can't have in a defense that relies on everybody doing their jobs the way this one does. I think Hallett and Hill are really solid. I think they know their assignments. They know what they're supposed to do. They have a lot of experience. They're great athletes. They're a really good duo, and I love the depth at safety. I think Judson Tallender is really taking a step forward. He's ready to go. I think P.J. O'Brien, Pat Narduzzi mentioned him today, is having a great camp. Stephon Hall and Javon McIntyre and Khalil Anderson. That group of scholarship safeties, it's like 7 guys, and I think they're all good. I think they're all good players. There's not one guy I would look at that in the group and be like, well, they're mostly good except for him. He's a dud. They are really good players. It's a really strong group. I think the secondary is going to be good. Let's see here. Josh Newark says, I worry that the Tennessee game turns into a track meet. Can Pitt of 2022 come back from being down 10-0 with a heavier emphasis on the run this year? Tennessee reminds me of a potential Western Michigan type of game. So, this is something I've kind of gone back and forth about, and I've talked a lot about. There are going to be games where Pitt's going to need to be able to outscore their opponent. They're going to have to be able to go blow for blow with a high-powered offense. And that's something I need to see from Keaton Slovis. That's something I need to see from these wide receivers. That's something I need to see from Frank Cignetti, that he can call a game in that kind of setting. And I have no reason to think that he can't. I think Cignetti's good enough and he's been around long enough to be able to do that, but I still need to see it. It needs to actually happen. And so we're kind of waiting on that. Now, there is a school of thought. I was having this conversation with somebody, maybe Pat Bostic or somebody like that. And he was like, saying, okay, I get what you're saying. Can Pitt win a shootout? Can they play in that kind of a setting? But on the flip side, with this emphasis on balance in the offense, on establishing more of a run game, maybe you give yourself a better chance in those kinds of games when you can establish the run, when you can eat up a little bit more clock, keep your defense on the sidelines and keep that high-powered offense on their sidelines. Now, you've got to be able to do it effectively. You've got to be able to pull it off and move the chains and stay on the field and not go 3 and out. You can't waste possessions if you're going to try and play that way. If you're going to, you've got to be able to execute it. But, I think if you can do that well, it can be effective. But as you say, if Pitt falls behind, if they get in a hole 10-0 or 21-7 or something like that, can they come back? You're not going to be able to run your way back into that game. You're going to need to make plays. And every game, they're going to need to make plays with the passing game. They're going to need to come up with big-time throws from Keaton Slovis and big-time catches from Konate Mumfield and Bub Means and all those guys. They're going to have to do those things. And I don't think... For all the talk about renewed emphasis on the run game and finding balance in the offense, for all that talk, I don't think it means that they're just going to be a run-first offense and not rely on the passing game at all. I don't think that's what it means. It just means they're going to run a little bit more than they did before. They're going to have a little bit more focus on it, a little bit more emphasis on it, while still understanding that you got to throw the ball to win games. And so, I'm curious. I'm as curious as you are to see if this team can win a shootout. But not necessarily because I think they're going to be focused on the run too much. More so because I want to see if this new quarterback can win a shootout. And I want to see if this coordinator can call that kind of game. Let's see. Scrolling through the comments. A lot of talk about what could possibly cost this team this season, and it's really about, people are looking back at the Tennessee game last year. Josh Newark says Tennessee had a chance to go up 17-0 if Milton hits one play early on. Corey Lloyd says Mackenzie Milton missed a lot of throws that could have hurt us last year. Ryan Kaminsky says hopefully last season's game will help the Pitt coaches have a better game plan, considering Hooker played most of that game. They'll know how they'll be attacked. Christian Kosmak says they missed a few walk-in touchdowns between bad throws and drops. And I mean, all that stuff, I think is what concerns me about that game. Is what concerns me about Tennessee. Is I think they're a good team. I think Hendon Hooker has developed into a pretty good quarterback, and I think they have good receivers, and I think they're going to be able to attack through the passing game. And Pitt's either going to have to be able to defend that really well, which means getting pressure on Hooker, or they're going to need to be able to react and respond and score a bunch of points on their own, and probably a little bit of both, kind of like it was last year. You're not going to be able to rely on Mackenzie Milton missing a bunch of guys in the first quarter, first half, or however long he played. Hendon Hooker's probably going to hit more of those passes. And so you're going to, not leave those guys wide open, and B, be able to score with them and respond to it and put up a bunch of points of your own. Let's see here. Patrick Schultz says one thing that was underappreciated about Kenny Pickett was his taking care of the football. How does Slovis compare in that regard? I think I don't know. I mean, I think, one of the advantages with Keaton Slovis is he is older. He's more experienced. He's been on the field. He's played in big environments. He's played in big games. So the atmosphere should not get to him, whether it's playing the West Virginia game or it's going to Miami in the season finale. Louisville, if they pack a good crowd in there, going to Western Michigan. I mean, these games should not rattle him. The environments and the atmosphere should not rattle him. He should do a good job in that regard. As far as his decision making, I mean, it remains to be seen. We can look back at what he did at USC. I don't think he was particularly careless with the ball as far as putting it into bad spots. But, I mean, everybody's going to throw some interceptions every now and then. It's just when you do it and, how you do it, and, not doing it too often and not doing it at the worst possible times, kind of like the Miami game, which that happened last year. Although Kenny Pickett's interceptions in that game were certainly not the only issue. It was, one of many problems that plagued Pitt that day. Let's see here. RJ Seaman38 was a super chatter. He says, defense wins games, not worried if the offense controls the clock and plays to team strength. Defense does win games. But you know what? Scoring more points than the other team wins games. So focus on that. Try and score a lot. That's why Mark Whipple was great, because he scored 41.4 points per game. Set a Pitt record for points per game and yards per game. He did a good job because offense ultimately wins games. Will Z, hey Chris, just curious, since you've watched a little bit of the practices, have you seen much of Jared Wayne? I know Pat Narduzzi said he's banged up, but has he been in any sort of drills, even non-contact? Yeah, he's been working. I think kind of like Pat Narduzzi alluded to, he's been a little limited this in training camp. I think they're trying to be careful with him. In the spring, if guys are a little bit banged up, you're extra cautious with them, particularly veteran guys, older guys like a Jared Wayne. You get into training camp, you want to push those guys a little bit more. You want them to be practicing a little bit more, participating a little bit more, so they're ready for the season. But at the same time, you got to be smart, particularly if it is a veteran like Jared Wayne. You don't want to push it too much and have something that an injury or banged up situation that lingers into the season. You want to get that. You want to make sure he's healthy. That's the key, because you want him on the field. And every indication I have is that he should be fine and good to go when the season starts. But yeah, as Pat Narduzzi said, he's been a little banged up and a little limited. So let's see here. Comments to get here. Benjamin Glazer says I can call him Ben. I appreciate that. Thanks. And RJ Seaman38 will leave it with this. Says ESPN Game Day, packed house. The environment should be as good as anywhere in the country. Must win. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if you want to accomplish what you want to accomplish this year, you got to win those first 2 games. I mean, you just have to. It's this year. It's going to be a letdown if at any point the players are saying, we still have our goals in front of us. We still have our goal of winning the Coastal Division in front of us. Because that's a goal, but that's the bottom rung goal for this team. Losing one or both of those first 2 games, even just losing one of them, cuts out one of your top goals. And so you have to start strong. You have to go out and win those first 2 games. You have to make a statement about who you are. You have to make a statement with big wins like that. When you have Power 5 non-conference opportunities like that, you got to go out and take care of business. You really do. And it starts with that West Virginia game. It is a must win. Because I think for this team, every game is a must win. Because the opportunity is just that great. So here we are. We've come full circle. I started off by saying how I wanted to think of ways that this team could fall short of its goals, potential shortcomings that this team has, pratfalls they could fall into, and issues that could pop up. And here we are. We've come all the way around to me talking about how they, their goals should be to win every single game, and anything less than 10-2 would be a disappointment. So I guess my mission failed of trying to find those holes and issues and shortcomings, but we did our best. We did our best. Thanks to everybody who tuned in tonight. A lot of fun on this live stream. This is one of the fastest hours that we've done. We had a good time though. Lots of great comments and questions. I can feel the energy of the season is coming. Everybody's getting fired up and ready to go with these Wednesday night shows. Listen, make sure you like the video. I already see a lot of likes on there. It's awesome. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, share it with some friends, tell people about it. Spread the word, because we want to get more eyeballs on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com and try and build out what we're doing and try and do more with the YouTube channel. And think got a few ideas and some things we can do. And your support definitely is much appreciated. So thanks everybody who joined us on the live stream tonight. Thanks everybody who listens to the podcast throughout the week. We appreciate you as well. Make sure you stay tuned. Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It is the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. So go there, read all the content, discuss on the message boards. We appreciate it. We're on there all day, every day. All right, Monday morning we'll have the weekend recap, get you caught up on everything you need to know to start next week, and then we'll be back next Wednesday night for another Panther-Lair show, 8:30 p.m. right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll talk to you next week.